The envelope was thin. That was the first thing I noticed. Too thin for any kind of good news. The way a letter from a doctor is never thick. The way the important things in life always seem to arrive in the smallest containers. I was standing in my front hallway on Middle Street, the old radiator knocking the way it always does on October evenings when the cold starts coming off the Piscataqua, and my grandson Logan was standing there in his coat with his collar still up, and he was holding out this envelope to me with both hands, like an offering, like something he was almost afraid to give. I noticed his hands were not steady. Logan Pierce is 30 years old, and he has been steady his entire life. I watched that boy grow up. I watched him do his homework at the same kitchen table where I am sitting right now to tell you this story. I watched him walk across the stage at the University of New Hampshire in a suit that was slightly too big for him because he had lost weight studying for his finals, and I watched him get into his car and drive to Boston to take a job that he was overqualified for because he wanted to earn his place rather than be handed one. Logan Pierce has never in his life handed me anything with unsteady hands. "Granddad," he said, "I need you to promise me something. I'm going to stop right here for just a moment before I go any further, because what I'm about to tell you took me a long time to understand, and it took me even longer to be willing to say out loud to another living soul. So if you are still with me right now, do me a kindness and tell me down in the comments where you are listening from. What town? What state? What time of night is it where you are? I want to know who is out here in the dark with me while I try to get through this. Leave a like if something in those first few seconds already reached you. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because I have a new one of these here every single day, and you are going to want to be here for what comes next. All right, let me get back to that hallway." He did not answer my questions that night. That was the thing that stayed with me after he left. After I heard his car pull away from the curb and the sound of it disappear up toward Islington Street. And then nothing. Nothing but the radiator and the harbor wind pressing against the old windows of this house. He did not explain. He did not prepare me. He put that envelope in my hands. He looked at me with a seriousness that I had not seen on his face since the night his grandfather, my brother Gerald, passed away. And he said, "Only open this if my mother disappears and you can't reach her." And then he walked back out into the October dark. I stood in the hallway for a long time holding that envelope. I am 71 years old. I was born in this city. I grew up 2 streets over from where I'm sitting right now, in a house my father rented from a man who owned half the waterfront properties, back when the waterfront still smelled like rope and diesel and the particular salt of working water rather than the polished tourist version of itself that you see today on a summer weekend. My name is Edward Callahan, and I spent 42 years in maritime logistics coordination, which is a title that sounds more impressive than it is, because what it really means is that I was the man who knew where everything was and what it was supposed to do, and when it was supposed to do it, and when something went sideways, which it always did eventually, I was the one who figured out how to put it right again. I managed cargo schedules and crew manifests and port clearances, and the 1,000 small crises that attend any enterprise built on putting things on the water and trusting the water to give them back. I am not a man who loses his composure when the situation gets complicated. 42 years taught me that a man who panics does not solve anything and usually makes it worse. You think your way through the problem. You keep your hands busy and your head clear, and you work it out step by step. I put the envelope on the mantel above the fireplace in the front room, between the photograph of my wife Margaret taken in Gloucester in 1978, and the small brass compass my father gave me when I was 12 years old, and told me every man needs to know which direction is north. Margaret has been gone 9 years now. The compass still works. I looked at the envelope sitting there between those 2 things, and I thought, "Logan, what have you put in my hands tonight?" 2 days passed. I want you to understand what those 2 days were like, because if I just tell you that 2 days passed and then something happened, I am not being honest with you about the weight of those 48 hours. I am not a man who is given to worry in the ordinary sense. I have seen cargo ships miss their berth windows in a nor'easter and sorted it out. I have dealt with port authority disputes in 3 countries and a customs seizure in Montreal in February that I still do not enjoy remembering. I know how to compartmentalize. I know how to set a problem aside until I have enough information to address it. That is not indifference. That is discipline. There is a difference. But this was my family. And that envelope sat on the mantel, and it sat between Margaret's photograph and that brass compass, and I sat in my chair after supper on the first night, and I looked at it, and I thought, what kind of trouble would make Logan come to me instead of handling it himself? Because Logan handles things. He learned that from watching me, or so he tells me, though I sometimes think he was simply born that way, with that particular quality of self-containment that the men in our family seem to carry like a second coat. He does not ask for help unless he genuinely has no other option, which meant that whatever was inside that envelope represented something he could not carry alone and had not found a way to tell me directly. His mother, my daughter-in-law, Caroline Pierce, who is 52 years old, who has been a regional maritime compliance consultant for going on 20 years now, who drives a sensible car and keeps a spotless calendar, and whose organizational capability I have admired and occasionally feared since the day Logan's father first brought her home to dinner in this very house in the autumn of 1994. Caroline, who sends me a text message every Sunday evening to check in, and who brought me a casserole when Margaret died, and who has never, in all the years I have known her, given me any reason for concern. Only open this if my mother disappears and you can't reach her. What does a father hear in those words? What does a grandfather hear? I am both, you understand. Logan's father, my son Patrick, died of a heart attack 7 years ago at 53 years of age, which is an age that seems impossible to me even now, because a man should not go at 53. A man has barely finished figuring out who he is at 53. And when Patrick went, I became the thing this family organized itself around, not because I asked for that role, or because I was the most qualified person for it, but because I was the one who was still standing. And so when Logan comes to me in October, with an envelope and an instruction and a look in his eyes, like a man standing at the edge of something he cannot name, I am not just his grandfather in that moment. I am the person who is supposed to know what to do. I did not know what to do. Portsmouth in October is a particular kind of beautiful that I think nobody who has not lived here quite understands. The tourists are gone. The summer noise goes with them. What is left is the city as it actually is, old brick and narrow streets, and the harbor sitting gray and serious under a sky that cannot decide between clouds and clarity. I walked down to the waterfront on the morning of the second day, the way I have walked to the waterfront my entire life when I needed to think, past the old customs house and along the harbor walk where the lobster boats were coming in, their engines low and purposeful in the cold. There is a coffee place on Bow Street that has been there longer than most of the people who drink coffee in it, and I sat at a table by the window and drank a cup and looked at the water and tried to reason my way through what I knew, which was not very much. Logan was working. I knew that, because Caroline had mentioned when she and I last spoke, which was the previous Sunday, that he had a significant review coming up at work, a major risk assessment project related to some of the newer offshore insurance structures that were being developed out of Portsmouth Harbor. I knew he had been under pressure. I knew, in the way you know things about people you love without being told directly, that the last several months had been harder for him than he let on. He had come back from Boston 18 months ago with a promotion and a quietness about him that was different from his usual quietness. Patrick's quietness had been contentment. Logan's was something else. I had been waiting for the right moment to ask him about it, the way men in my family wait for things, which is too long, which is one of our most consistent failures. I finished my coffee and walked back up through the South End, past the old houses on Court Street with their widows' walks and their November window boxes, and I was almost back to Middle Street when my phone rang. The caller identification showed Logan. I answered on the second ring. "Granddad." His voice was controlled. Controlled in the way that costs something. In the way that a man controls his voice when the alternative is losing it entirely. "You need to open the envelope." "Logan, tell me what is going on." There was a pause. I could hear his breathing. I could hear something behind him. An office environment, maybe. The muffled sound of other voices and the particular acoustic quality of a large professional space. "I can't right now," he said. "I'm sorry. Just open it, please." And the call ended. "I'm going to ask you to stay with me for a second here, because I know this is a lot to hold, and I want to make sure we are walking through it together. If you are somewhere that this is reaching you, if you have ever received a piece of information you are not sure how to carry, write me something in the comments. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is where you are tonight. And hit the like button if you have not already, because every one of those tells me somebody is out here listening. Subscribe if you want to be here tomorrow, because I promise you there is more to this story, and I will not leave you without the whole of it. Okay, I am back on Middle Street now. I am back at my front door, and I have a phone in one hand and a key in the other, and I am about to walk into my house and open an envelope that my grandson handed me like it was something fragile. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one with the scratch along the left edge where Patrick dropped a model ship kit when he was 11 years old. I can see the harbor from the kitchen window if the angle is right, just a slice of it between the houses on the next street. Gray water and a white boat moving slowly north toward the naval shipyard. I put the envelope on the table in front of me and I sat with it for a moment, long enough to register that my hands were completely still. After 42 years of managing things that mattered, my hands knew how to stay still. That was the one thing I could count on. I opened it. Inside was not one document, but several, arranged with a care that I recognized immediately as Logan's. He organizes things the way I organize things, which is to say with a thoroughness that other people sometimes mistake for rigidity, but which is really a form of respect for the problem at hand. Everything was labeled. Everything was in order. There was a tabbed section at the front, with a handwritten note in Logan's hand that said, "Start here. Read in order. Don't stop until you've read the letter at the end." The first documents were legal in nature. I spent enough years working with maritime contracts and port authority regulations to be comfortable reading legal language, and these were not complicated. They were in the plain and careful language of estate planning and medical administration, a set of directives, a power of attorney document for medical decisions, a trust administration memorandum, a set of care coordination notes with names of specific physicians and institutions, and a timeline that had been constructed with a precision that told me immediately someone had put serious professional effort into it. Caroline's name was on every page. I turned to the letter at the back. It was handwritten, 4 pages, front and back, in Caroline's handwriting, which I know well from years of birthday cards and holiday correspondence, and the occasional note tucked into something she sent over. Her handwriting is deliberate and even, which is itself a kind of personality description. But on these pages, the handwriting was more careful than usual, the way a person writes when they know they need to get it right and are not certain they will have the opportunity to try again. She began with my name. Not Ed, not Edward, the full thing. Edward, which is what she has always called me when she wanted me to pay attention. I have to stop here and I have to tell you something, before I tell you what the letter said, because the particular quality of that moment at my kitchen table is something I want you to understand. I am 71 years old. I have buried a wife. I have buried a son. I have made my peace, or something like peace, with the understanding that life does not spare the people you love. I thought I had developed a sufficient relationship with difficulty. I thought that was the trade you made when you got old enough, that you gave up the illusion of permanence in exchange for a kind of steadiness. I thought I knew how to receive hard news. I did not know how to receive this. Because what Caroline's letter told me, in her careful handwriting across 8 pages on my kitchen table with the harbor showing gray between the houses, was that she had been privately living with a diagnosis for the better part of 6 months that she had not told me about. A condition affecting the architecture of her memory, specifically the systems that manage short-term retention and contextual orientation, a condition that does not arrive all at once but comes gradually, in a way that she had begun to notice in small fractures before she had a name for it. A misplaced word here, a moment of disorientation there, a conversation she found herself unable to fully reconstruct an hour after having it. She had gone to her doctor alone. She had received the assessment alone. She had made her initial decisions alone, not because she did not trust me. The letter was very clear about that, but because she had spent 52 years being the organized one, the one who kept the calendar and managed the structure and made sure the important things were handled, and she needed to understand what she was facing before she could think about what to ask of anyone else. Logan had found out because he works in risk assessment, and part of his professional expertise involves exactly the kind of medical and administrative planning that Caroline's situation required, and she had trusted him with it because she needed someone with that specific knowledge. And Logan, carrying that trust for months, had been trying to figure out how to bring me into it without violating his mother's confidence about her own timing. The envelope was not a mystery, it was a plan, and I sat at my kitchen table with the harbor showing between the houses, and I held those 8 pages in my steady hands, and I read them from the first word to the last, and then I read them again, and then I put them down carefully on the table, with the same precision that Logan had used to arrange them, and I sat there for a long time, with the particular silence of a man who has been given something too large to immediately understand. The radiator knocked. The light on the water shifted. Outside, somewhere on the street, a dog barked twice and then went quiet. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the way she handled everything she had to handle in the last 2 years of her life, which was with a grace that I have never been able to fully account for, a willingness to face things that I found almost unbearable to witness, because I knew that I was not capable of matching it. I thought about how she never stopped being herself, even when herself was harder to hold on to. I thought about how she used to say that the important thing is not whether you can stop hard things from happening, because you cannot, but whether you can show up for the people they happen to alongside you. I picked up my phone and I called Logan. He answered immediately, which told me he had been waiting. "I read it," I said. He did not say anything for a moment. "I'm sorry, Granddad," he said. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to tell you before she was ready. But then she had a hard week, and she was worried about what would happen if something shifted before we had a plan, and I needed someone to hold the plan." "You needed someone to hold the plan," I said. "Yes." I thought about 42 years of managing things that mattered. I thought about the cargo ships and the port clearances and the Montreal customs situation in February. I thought about what it meant to know which direction was north. "All right," I said. "Come over tonight. Bring whatever you need. We are going to sit down at this table and figure out what comes next." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not upset?" he said. "I did not say that," I said. "I said, come over tonight." He came, block 2. There is a particular hour in Portsmouth in late October, somewhere around 6 in the evening, when the last of the daylight does something unusual to the brick on the old buildings along Bow Street and Penhallow Street, a color that is not quite red and not quite gold, but something in between, something that looks like the city is lit from inside rather than from above. I have lived here my entire life, and I never stopped noticing it. Margaret used to stop whatever she was doing when that light appeared. She would just stand at whatever window was nearest and look at it for a moment, and then she would go back to what she was doing, and that was all. She never tried to explain it or photograph it or make more of it than it was. She just looked. That was one of the many things I admired about her. Logan arrived at 6:15. I heard his car, and then I heard him on the front steps, and then the knock, which is always 3 knocks, because that is what I taught him when he was old enough to understand that you do not just walk into someone's house, even if you have a key. He had a key. He knocked anyway. That tells you something about the kind of man he is. I had made coffee. That is what I do when there is something serious to discuss. I make coffee. Margaret used to say that I had substituted coffee for emotional vocabulary for so long that the smell of a fresh pot was my body's way of saying, "This matters. Pay attention." She was not wrong. I make it in the old percolator that I have had since before Patrick was born, a heavy aluminum thing that takes 10 minutes longer than any modern machine, but produces something real in a way that I cannot fully explain, and I do not particularly want to. Logan sat down at the kitchen table. He was still in his work clothes, the good wool coat he bought when he moved back from Boston, and he had the look of a man who had spent the day deciding how to have a conversation and still was not certain he had found the right approach. I put a cup in front of him and sat down across from him, and I looked at him for a moment before I said anything. He looked tired. Not the temporary tired of a difficult week at work, the deeper kind, the tired that comes from carrying something heavy for longer than a person should carry it alone. "Start from the beginning," I said. "Not the beginning of the envelope. The beginning." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. His father did that too. It is a Callahan habit, or so I have always thought, though Logan has more Pierce in him than Callahan in some ways, which is not a complaint, but an observation. "She noticed it in the spring," he said. "She kept it to herself for about 2 months before she went to the doctor. Then she had the assessment, and she had a follow-up, and she had a conversation with a specialist at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and then she called me." Let me stop here for just a moment, because I know there are people listening to this tonight who have been in a room like my kitchen, with a cup of coffee going cold in front of them, and someone they love telling them something they were not ready to hear. If that is you, I want you to know I understand more of that than I used to. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. What city? What state? Are you somewhere warm right now, or is it cold where you are? Leave a like if this is landing on you. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do, because there is a new story here every single day, and the one that finds you at exactly the right moment might be tomorrow's. All right. Back to my kitchen. Back to Logan with both hands around his cup. "She called you," I said. "She called me because she had already done the research," he said. "She had looked at what the condition would likely mean in practical terms over the next several years, and she had identified the areas where she needed professional expertise rather than just family support. I work in risk assessment. She needed someone who understood how to build a structure around uncertainty. I had to admire that, even in the middle of everything else I was feeling. Caroline had been diagnosed with something that strikes at the architecture of the mind, which is the most intimate and frightening kind of loss, and her first instinct had been to understand it, to map it, to figure out what it required. That is either remarkable strength or a very sophisticated form of denial, and knowing Caroline, I suspected it was both. "What did she ask you to do?" I said. Logan took a breath. "She asked me to help her build a care plan, something that would hold up whether she had 10 years of relative stability or 2 years of significant change, something that covered the legal structures, the medical coordination, the financial management, the family communication. She wanted to know that if her judgment became unreliable before she had the chance to make decisions, the decisions were already made." "And the envelope," I said. "She was scared," he said. "Not for herself. That was what she told me. She was scared of what would happen to the people around her if she changed faster than they were prepared for. She wanted someone outside the immediate day-to-day to hold the full picture, someone who would not be undone by it." He looked at me across the table. "She chose you. I have spent 42 years solving problems by understanding their structure, by mapping the points of failure and the dependencies and the tolerances, and the places where a system could hold up under pressure, and the places where it would give. I am good at this. It is the work of my adult life, and it is work I am genuinely proud of. But there is a kind of problem that does not yield to structure, or does not yield to structure alone, and this was one of them. My daughter-in-law, the woman my son loved for 22 years, and who helped raise the man sitting across from me, had been sitting with a frightening diagnosis for 6 months and protecting everyone around her from it, not out of dishonesty, but out of an excess of care, and the weight of that had fallen on my grandson, and he had been carrying it in the way the men of this family carry things, which is quietly and alone and for longer than they should. "You should have told me sooner," I said. "I know," he said. "That is not an accusation," I said. "It is just true." "I know," he said again. I looked at him. "You were protecting her." "I was trying to," he said. "And protecting you, and probably protecting myself if I'm being honest." Logan and I have not talked like this very often. That is also a family truth I am not proud of. The Callahan men have historically been better at showing up than at explaining ourselves, better at presence than at conversation, better at making sure the practical things were in order than at sitting across a kitchen table and saying the actual words for the actual feelings. I know this about us. Margaret told me this about us for 38 years, and I agreed with her, and then generally continued to be exactly the same. It is not a character flaw so much as a deeply rooted pattern, the kind of thing that passes from fathers to sons without anyone intending it. But Logan was 30 years old, and he had been carrying something that nobody should carry alone, and he was sitting at my kitchen table with his father's habit of holding a coffee cup in both hands, and I thought about Margaret standing at the window when the light changed, not making more of it than it was, just being present for it. "Tell me about her condition," I said. "Not the legal framework, the actual thing." He did. He explained it the way someone explains something they have studied carefully and lived with for months, with a thoroughness that was also a kind of grief. "The condition affects the consolidation of short-term memory," he said, "particularly the systems that attach context to recent events. She can recall the past with reasonable fidelity. Her long-term memory, her professional knowledge, her fundamental personality, her values, none of those are in immediate jeopardy. What becomes unreliable over time and in ways that are not always predictable is her ability to track the present. A conversation she had this morning, an appointment she scheduled last Tuesday, the sequence of a recent week. She had started keeping notes, he told me. She had developed a system. She was, in other words, still being Caroline about it, still bringing her organizational intelligence to bear on the thing that was threatening to undermine the very faculty she had built her life around. I found this both extraordinary and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Does she know you told me?" I said. "Not yet," he said. "She knows I had the envelope and she knows I sent you the signal to open it. She'll know by tonight." "How will she feel about that?" He considered this. "Relieved, I think," he said. "She's been ready for a while. She just didn't know how to start the conversation with you. Because she did not want to worry me. Because she did not want to put her difficulty on you," he said. "There is a difference." There was a difference. I thought about it. Caroline had spent 20 years being the competent one in practical matters, the one who organized the details and kept the calendar and made sure the structure held. My role in this family, particularly since Patrick died, had been the steady one, the one you called when things went wrong. She had not wanted to become one of the things that went wrong. She had not wanted to be a burden on the man she had relied upon, to be the steady center of things. This is the thing about people who carry responsibility well. They are sometimes the last to ask for what they need from anyone else, because asking feels, to them, like a kind of failure, even when it is not, even when it is, in fact, the most responsible thing they could do. I want to stop here, because I think about this a lot, and I think some of you listening tonight might think about it too. How many of us have been the person holding something alone because we did not want to put it on someone else? How many of us have been the person who would have wanted to be asked? If that question is landing on you right now, write me something in the comments. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is there. And leave a like if this is the kind of conversation you needed to hear someone else have. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there is a new one here every day without fail, and I am going to keep having these conversations as long as you are out there listening. All right. My kitchen. October. Logan across the table. When can I see her? I said. He looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, though he held it carefully. She's home tonight, he said. She's been home. She went for a drive this morning down to Rye, the way she does when she needs to think, and she came back around noon and she's been home since. She went to Rye, I said. He smiled slightly. She always goes to Rye. That was true. Caroline goes to Rye Beach when she needs to think, has done for 20 years. She goes in the morning, early enough that the parking lot is empty, and she walks down to the waterline, and she stands there for a while, and then she drives back. She has done this in every season. I went with her once, about a year after Patrick died, and she did not talk the whole time. We just stood there and looked at the Atlantic, and then we drove back, and she said, before she got out of the car, "Thank you for coming." That was all, but I understood what she meant. "I will go over tomorrow morning," I said. "Early, before she leaves for the day." He nodded. "Logan," I said. He looked at me. "You did the right thing, keeping her confidence as long as she needed, coming to me when you needed to. All of it. You did the right thing." He looked down at the coffee cup. "I kept thinking I should have handled it differently," he said. "I kept thinking there was a way to manage it that didn't involve handing my grandfather an envelope and running away." "You did not run away," I said. "You came back. That is what matters." He looked up. "She's going to need a lot of help," he said. "Not today, but over time. The kind of help that requires someone to be present and consistent. And I have my job, and I'm not always going to be able to be the person on the ground. I thought about coming back to Portsmouth full time, but I don't know if that's the right answer. I don't know what the right answer is." "Nobody knows what the right answer is at the beginning," I said. "The right answer is what you figure out by staying at the table long enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Did my dad ever come to you?" he said, "when he didn't know what to do?" The question caught me in the chest the way questions about Patrick sometimes do, without warning, like a change in the wind. "Not often enough," I said. "That was my failure as much as his. But when he did come, yes. We sat at this table, usually with the same coffee." Logan looked at the percolator on the counter. "That specific coffee?" he said. "That specific percolator," I said. He almost smiled. "That explains a lot about how you make decisions," he said. "What does it explain?" "That you make them slowly," he said, "and they stay warm." I did not have an immediate response to that, which is unusual for me. I decided to take it as a compliment and move on. We talked for another hour and a half about the practical framework Caroline had built, which was genuinely impressive, as careful and thorough as anything I had seen in my professional life, about the legal documents and the medical directives and the financial structures, about the specialists she had identified and the care coordinator she had already been in contact with, about what Logan could manage remotely, and what needed a local presence, and what that local presence might look like over time. And then, after the practical things were covered, we talked about her, about Caroline the person, not Caroline the situation, about the trip she had taken Patrick and Logan to Quebec City when Logan was 12, which he still talks about the way she remembers every birthday in this family without a calendar, because she has simply always held those dates as if they were important facts about the world rather than personal obligations. About her laugh, which Patrick always said was the first thing he noticed about her, which was true. It is a good laugh, generous and real. About what it meant to be someone who held things together for everyone else, and what it cost, and what it would mean to now be the one who needed things held together for her. By the time Logan left, it was past 9. I walked him to the door. He put on his coat and he stopped on the front steps and looked out at the street, the way his father used to stop and look before getting into the car, not because there was anything to see, but because he needed a moment before the next thing. "Tomorrow?" he said. "Tomorrow," I said. "I will see her tomorrow." He nodded. He walked to his car. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner toward Islington Street, and then I went back inside and I washed the coffee cups and I turned off the lights in the kitchen, and I went and stood in the front room for a moment, in the dark, with Margaret's photograph on the mantel and the brass compass beside it, and the empty spot where the envelope had been. I thought about the word trust, about the specific way Caroline had used it in her letter, not as a sentiment but as a structural decision, the way you would use it in a formal document, the way you would say, "I am entrusting this to you because I believe you are capable of holding it without being broken by it." I thought about what it meant that she had looked at me, at 71 years old, at a man who had never learned to say the right thing at the right moment, who had been better at logistics than at love in the operational sense, and had decided that I was the one who could hold this steady. I thought about my father's compass on the mantel. Every man needs to know which direction is north. I thought about what north meant now, not a cardinal direction, but a commitment, a decision to be present and useful and honest and steady for the people who needed those things from me, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The harbor lights were visible through the front window. They are always visible from this room at night, a faint glow over the rooftops, the signal lights of the working water that built this city and sustained my family through generations of difficult winters. Portsmouth has been here since 1623. It has survived fires and floods and wars, and economic collapses, and the slow erosion of industries that once defined it. And it is still here, still sending its lights out over the water, still receiving whatever comes in from the sea. I can hold steady, I thought. That is what I do. That is what I have always done. I went to bed. I lay there in the dark for a while, with Margaret's side of the bed empty, the way it has been for 9 years, and still feels wrong on certain nights. And I thought about what I would say to Caroline when I saw her in the morning. Not the practical things. Those were already in order, or would be soon enough. What I needed to find, lying there in the dark with the harbor quiet outside the window, and the house settling around me the way old houses settle, was the thing to say that was not about logistics. The thing that was not a plan or a structure or a set of directives. The thing that was simply one person telling another person that they were not alone. I had never been good at that. Margaret would tell you I was not good at that, but I was 71 years old, and my daughter-in-law had written me 8 pages in her careful handwriting and put her dignity in my hands along with the legal documents, and I thought maybe it was time to get better at it. I went to sleep eventually. The harbor was still there when I woke up. It always is. I have driven the route from Middle Street to Caroline's house on Juniper Lane so many times over the years that my hands know the turns before my mind consciously makes them. Left on State Street, through the South End, past the old cemetery where the stones go back to the 1600s, their inscriptions worn to suggestions by 3.5 centuries of New England weather. Right on South Street. Past the elementary school where Logan went, where Patrick went before him. The neighborhood gets quieter as you move away from the historic district. The lots a little larger, the trees older, the houses that particular kind of substantial, that means a family put down roots here and intended to stay. Caroline and Patrick bought the house on Juniper Lane in 1998, when Logan was 2 years old, and the neighborhood was already established, and they were beginning to understand that Portsmouth was not a temporary arrangement, but the place where their life was going to happen. I pulled into her driveway at 7:30 in the morning. Her car was there. The lights in the kitchen were on. I could see the yellow square of the window from the driveway, warm against the November gray of the sky, which was the particular gray of a New England morning that has not decided yet whether it intends to produce rain or simply to threaten it. There was a pot of something on the front porch, a chrysanthemum past its best season, orange going brown at the edges. Caroline usually replaces those before they go. I noticed that she had not. I sat in the car for a moment. I want to stop here and ask you something, because I think about this moment a lot. The moment before the conversation you have been preparing yourself for, when you are still in the car and the kitchen light is on inside and you know that in 30 seconds everything is going to be different, and there is no version of this where you go back to not knowing. Have you ever sat in a car like that? Have you ever had a moment like that, where you knew something was waiting on the other side of a door that was going to change how you understood your life? Write to me in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from tonight. Tell me what city, what state. Tell me if it is early where you are, or late. Leave a like if you have been in that car. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest of this, because I promise you, I'm going to get through all of it, every last piece of it, and there is a new story here, every single day. Okay, I am getting out of the car now. I knocked 3 times, same as Logan. It runs in the family. She opened the door after a moment. She was dressed, which meant she'd been up for a while. That was Caroline's way. She was always dressed before 7, regardless of what the day held. It was a discipline she maintained the way certain people maintain a garden, not because anyone required it, but because it was part of how she organized herself against the uncertainty of the world. She was wearing a dark green sweater and her hair was up, and she looked at me for a second when she opened the door, just a fraction of a second, and then she stepped back to let me in. "You read it," she said. "I read it," I said. She nodded. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, and I followed her, closing the door behind me. The house smelled the way it has always smelled, of coffee and something faintly floral, a candle or a soap, and the particular neutrality of a well-kept house. Patrick's presence in this house had faded slowly over the 7 years since he died, not in any dramatic way, but in the gradual way that a person's particular habits stop shaping a space once they are no longer there to maintain them. The photographs were still on the walls. His books were still on the shelves. But the house had become Caroline's house, in the way that houses eventually become the surviving person's house. She poured me a cup of coffee without asking, which is what she has done every time I have come to this house for 30 years. She set it on the kitchen table and sat down across from where she had placed it, and I sat down, and we were at a kitchen table again, which seems to be where the important things in this family happen. "I am angry," I said. "I want to say that first, and I want you to understand that I am not going to stay angry, and the anger is not at you. It is at the situation. I needed you to know it is there." She looked at me carefully. "Okay," she said. "You should not have been alone with this for 6 months," I said. "I know," she said. "You would not have let me be alone with something like this for 6 months." A pause. "No," she said, "I would not have." "So we are going to agree that this was not the ideal approach, and then we are going to move past it," I said, "because there is no point in both of us sitting here being sorry about the way the last 6 months went, when what matters is what happens next." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Logan said you would be like this." "Like what?" "Practical," she said. "He said you would be upset for exactly as long as it was useful, and then you would be done being upset." "Logan knows me well," I said. "He does," she said. And then, quietly, with a precision that cost her something, she said, "I was afraid, Edward, not of the diagnosis, of what the diagnosis would make me in your eyes. I have spent 30 years being the organized one, the one who manages things, and the idea of sitting across from you and telling you that the part of my mind that does the organizing was starting to come loose, I did not know how to do that. I looked at her for a moment. You have never been the organized one to me, I said. You have been Patrick's wife. You have been Logan's mother. You have been family. That is not a job description. It does not have performance requirements. She looked at her coffee cup. Her jaw was set in the way that means she is holding something. I am still here, I said. I am still the same, and you are still you. The parts of you that matter are not the parts that are under threat. I need you to know that I believe that. She looked up. Her eyes were very bright. I know you believe it, she said. That is why I wrote you the letter. We sat with that for a moment, and then, because we are who we are, we opened the documents. The care plan Caroline and Logan had constructed together was, as I had begun to understand the night before, a serious piece of work. I have spent 4 decades evaluating plans under pressure, contingency structures for cargo operations, where the margin for error was measured in hours and the cost of failure was substantial, and I am not easily impressed by planning documents. This one impressed me. It had the quality of something built by 2 people who were genuinely frightened and had channeled that fear into thoroughness, which I recognized as a Callahan trait, and apparently also, or perhaps always, a Pierce trait. She walked me through it section by section. The medical component, which included her neurologist at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, a memory care specialist she had consulted privately, and a care coordinator whose role was to function as a liaison between the medical team and the family. The legal component, which included the medical power of attorney, the financial directives, and a trust structure that Logan had helped construct to ensure that her financial management remained stable regardless of changes in her condition. The daily life component, which was the most careful section, a set of structures she had developed to support her own memory, a consistent routine, a detailed note system, a calendar that cross-referenced with Logan's calendar so that he could monitor her schedule without it feeling like surveillance. She had built herself a system for functioning within her own limitations. She had done this alone, over 6 months, with the particular competence that I had admired in her for 30 years, and she was sitting across from me explaining it with a steadiness that I found extraordinary and slightly heartbreaking. "This is remarkable," I said, when she had finished walking me through it. "It is necessary," she said. "Those things are not mutually exclusive," I said. She almost smiled. "No," she said. "I suppose they are not." I asked her about the condition itself, the way Logan had explained it to me the night before, but in her own words, because I wanted to understand it the way she understood it, not the way it had been filtered through someone else's account. She described it with a frankness that was, again, characteristic. The short-term memory consolidation, she said, was the primary area of difficulty. Long-term memory was largely intact. Her professional knowledge, her judgment, her values, her personality, those were not under immediate threat. What was unreliable was the present, the recent, the this morning and this week, and I was just thinking about. "Do you notice it when it happens?" I said. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes I notice the gap after the fact. I will be in a conversation and realize I cannot place the beginning of it, or I will reach for a recent fact and find that the place where it should be is empty." She paused. "The worst part is not the forgetting itself. The worst part is the uncertainty about when it will happen. I can plan around a consistent difficulty. What I cannot plan around is not knowing which moments will be affected." I thought about that, about the specific cruelty of a condition that undermines not memory alone, but the reliability of the present moment, the ability to trust your own experience of what is happening right now. "What can I do?" I said. "Specifically, not in general. What can I do that would actually help?" She looked at me steadily. "Be consistent," she said. "The things that help most are routine and repetition, and the knowledge that certain people will be where they said they would be, when they said they would be there. Unpredictability is harder than difficulty, for me, right now." "I can be consistent," I said. "That is something I know how to do." "I know you can," she said. "That is also why I wrote you the letter." I stayed for 2 hours. We talked about practical things, and then we talked about other things, about Logan and about the trip she was planning to take in the spring to visit her sister in Portland, Maine, about a book she was reading, about the chrysanthemum on the porch that she had meant to replace and kept forgetting about. We talked about Patrick, which we do not do often, but which she did that morning with a particularity that I appreciated, specific memories rather than general grief, the way he made coffee, the specific road trip they took on their honeymoon through Vermont in October, the way he laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them, which was something I had always found mildly exasperating and now would give a great deal to hear again. I replaced the chrysanthemum on my way out. There was a garden center on Islington Street that I knew kept fall plants through November, and I stopped in and found a small pot of something hardier, a winterberry with red berries that would hold through the cold, and I brought it back and set it on her porch and texted her to tell her it was there. She texted back, "You did not have to do that." I texted back, "I know." She sent back a single word that I am fairly certain was not in Caroline's usual vocabulary, which told me she was more emotional than she had let on during our conversation, which was all right. Some things are better expressed in text than across a kitchen table. Let me pause here for a moment, because I want to tell you something before I go further into what the following weeks look like. What I have described so far is the framework, the documents and the conversations and the practical structures. But what actually happened over the months that followed was not primarily a logistical experience. It was a human one. And I want to make sure I give it the right weight before I move too quickly through it. If you are still with me, if you have been listening to this whole story and feeling something, write me a word in the comments. Just one word, whatever this is making you feel. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is there. Subscribe if you have not, because I put a new one of these here every day, and the next one might be the one you needed. And share this if you think somebody out there needs to hear a conversation like this one tonight. Okay, back to November, back to Portsmouth, back to what it actually looks like to decide to hold something steady. I began going to Caroline's house on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. This was not formally agreed upon in a document, though we could have made it a document, given the documentation tendencies of everyone in this situation. It was simply something we settled into, the way useful patterns tend to settle themselves when you stop overthinking them and just begin. I would arrive at 7:30. She would have coffee on. We would sit at the kitchen table and go through whatever needed attention that week. Her appointments, her schedule, the notes she had been keeping, the items on the care coordinator's checklist. And then, when the practical things were done, we would talk about something else. The book she was reading, the news from Logan, the particular light on the harbor that morning. Because from Caroline's kitchen you can see a corner of the Piscataqua if you know where to look. I learned things during those Tuesday and Thursday mornings that I would not have learned any other way. I learned that Caroline reads poetry, which I did not know after 30 years of knowing her. Apparently she has always read it. She simply has never mentioned it because it seemed to her like a private thing. She showed me a collection of New England poets she had kept since college, a paperback that was cracked at the spine and marked throughout, with her careful handwriting in the margins. She read me one of the poems on a Thursday morning in November, when the first snow of the season was coming down outside the window, a short poem about waiting and about water and about the way the sea returns everything eventually. And I sat there at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold and thought about Margaret standing at the window when the light changed, just being present for it, not making more of it than it was. I learned that Caroline worries about Logan more than she lets on, not about his professional life, which is evidently going well, but about whether he is happy, whether the life he has built in Portsmouth since coming back from Boston is the life he actually wants, or the life that proximity to his mother's situation has shaped for him. She worries that he came back because of her, that she is the reason he left Boston, and she worries about that obligation in the way that a person worries about something they cannot address directly without making it worse. I did not tell her she was wrong, because I was not certain she was wrong. And I have learned over 71 years that telling people they are wrong about a worry does not make the worry go away. It just makes them feel unheard on top of worried. I learned that she misses Patrick in a specific way that she has never been able to talk about with Logan, because she does not want Logan to feel responsible for the gap his father's death left in her life. She misses, she told me one Tuesday morning, with a precision that cost her, the specific experience of being known over time by a person who had chosen to keep knowing you, not the being in love, which she described as a younger feeling, important and real, but not the thing she was talking about. The being known, the accumulated history of being the person another person had watched and understood through 30 years of ordinary life. I understood what she meant. I have not said it as clearly as she said it, but I understand it. It was at a Tuesday morning in December, 3 weeks before Christmas, when I arrived to find her at the kitchen table with her note system open in front of her, and a look on her face that I had not seen before. Not distress exactly, something more specific, the particular expression of a person who has reached the edge of something they had prepared for and discovered that the preparation, while necessary, was not the same as readiness. "I lost 40 minutes this morning," she said. She said it plainly, the way she said most things, without inflation. I made coffee. I sat down to write my morning notes, and when I looked at the clock the next time it was 40 minutes later, and I do not know what happened in between. I sat down. "Did you feel unwell?" I said. "No," she said. "I felt nothing. That is what I mean. Not confused, not frightened, just absent, and then present again." I looked at her across the table. "Did you write anything?" I said. "While you were absent." She looked down at the notebook. There was writing on the page, 3 lines in her handwriting, but when she read it back to me, the words did not connect to anything she could place. She had been writing something, and she did not know what prompted it, or whether it was part of her morning notes or something else entirely. "All right," I said. "We are going to call the care coordinator this morning." "I know," she said. "And we are going to tell Logan." A pause. "I know," she said again. "And then we are going to drink this coffee," I said. "And then I am going to fix that hinge on the back door that has been making that sound since October." She looked at me. "You noticed that?" "I noticed that the first Tuesday I was here," I said. "I brought a screwdriver last week and forgot to do it. I will do it today." She was quiet for a moment. "You have been bringing things," she said. "What do you mean?" "The Winterberry," she said. "The hinge screwdriver. Last Thursday you brought a light bulb for the hallway fixture and replaced it without mentioning it." "The hallway was dark," I said. "Edward?" she said. And then she stopped. She looked at her coffee cup. When she looked up again, her eyes were very bright. "Thank you," she said, "for just coming and bringing things and not making it larger than it needs to be. I am not going to pretend I handled that gracefully. I am a man who is better with screwdrivers than with the moments that precede them." I said something like, "You are family. That is what family does," which is not particularly eloquent. But she nodded, and we called the care coordinator, and I fixed the hinge, and Logan came over that evening, and we sat at Caroline's kitchen table, all 3 of us, and talked through what the morning had meant, and what it suggested about the timeline, and what adjustments to the plan might be warranted. It was a hard conversation, and it was a necessary one, and we had it together, which was different from the way we had been handling things before the envelope, and the difference mattered. I want to stop here, because I think about that December morning a lot, and I think about what it means to show up for something you cannot fix, because I am a fixer by nature and by training. I spent 42 years fixing things. I know how to assess a problem and identify the points of failure and construct a solution that holds. But there is no fixing what Caroline has. There is only accompanying it. There is only being present for the person living it, bringing the Winterberry and the screwdriver and the light bulb, and sitting across the table on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and letting the coffee go cold while you listen to a poem about water. That is a different skill from fixing, and I was 71 years old before I understood it with any real depth. Block 4. Christmas came to Portsmouth the way it usually does, which is with a particular determination, as if the city takes the holiday seriously as a counterweight to the January that follows it. The decorations on Market Street go up the weekend after Thanksgiving. White lights along the old brick storefronts and wreaths on the doors of the restaurants, and the particular smell of salt air mixed with pine that is specific to a coastal New England December. I have walked those streets at Christmas since before I can remember, since my father walked them with me, since I walked them with Margaret, since I walked them with Patrick, and eventually with a small Logan who was more interested in the store windows than in anything I was trying to tell him about the history of the buildings we were passing. This December I walked them with Logan and Caroline on a Saturday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas. It was Caroline's idea. She wanted, she said, to do the ordinary thing. She wanted to walk down to the waterfront and look at the lights and have hot cider at the market stall that sets up near the fountain every December, and she wanted to do it with both of us, together. She said this in a text message to the family thread that Logan had set up, which was itself new, the three of us in a shared conversation, rather than the bilateral exchanges we had managed before, and the text said simply, "Saturday afternoon walk, the holiday one, both of you." And we both said yes. I'm going to stop here for a moment, because this is the part of the story I most want you to stay for, and I want to make sure you are still with me. If you have been listening since the beginning, you have come a long way. You have been in my kitchen, and in Caroline's kitchen, and in the car on the way to Juniper Lane, and in the offices of the care coordinator. And what I am about to tell you about that Saturday afternoon walk is, I think, the part that matters most. So before I get there, tell me where you are. What town? What time is it where you are right now? Leave a like if this story has been something tonight. Subscribe if you want to be here tomorrow, because there is a new one every single day without fail, and some of them start in hallways just like mine. And if someone in your life is carrying something alone right now, tonight, after you finish listening to this, maybe send this to them, because sometimes the thing a person needs most is to hear that somebody else has been in that kitchen. Okay. Saturday. Market Street, the three of us. Caroline walked between us, which was not a deliberate arrangement, but simply the way we fell into position when we came out of the parking lot on Hanover Street and started toward the waterfront. Logan on her left, me on her right, the way it worked. She was wearing the red coat she has worn every December for at least 10 years, the one with the brass buttons that Patrick always said made her look like a ship's captain, and she had her gloves on and her hair down, which she does not do often, and she looked, walking between us on Market Street with the white lights overhead, like herself, like the version of herself that existed before any of this, like Caroline in December, which has always been one of the most reliable things I know. We stopped at the cider stall. We looked at the lights on the Bow Street buildings reflecting in the harbor, the way they always do in December when the water is calm. Logan bought a small carved ornament from one of the market tables, a wooden boat with a tiny copper sail, and handed it to me without explanation. I put it in my coat pocket and did not say anything, which was the right response. Caroline stood at the harbor railing and looked at the water for a moment, the way she stands at the water at Rye Beach, quietly and without needing to explain why. Then she said, "I want to tell you both something." We stood on either side of her and looked at the harbor. "I've been thinking about what I want this to look like," she said. "Going forward, not the plan. We have the plan. I mean what I want it to feel like." She paused. "I do not want it to feel like I am being managed. I know that is not the intention. I know the intention is exactly the opposite. But I need you both to understand that as long as I am able to tell you what I need, I am going to tell you, and I need you to let that be enough." "Of course," Logan said. "I mean it specifically," she said. "I do not want Tuesday and Thursday mornings to become something that gets more frequent without my agreement. I do not want decisions made on my behalf before they need to be. I know what is coming. I am not under any illusion about what is coming. But I am here right now, and I am standing at this railing, looking at these lights, and I am telling you what I need, and that matters." She was right. It mattered. I said so. "You are right," I said, "and I will tell you something in return. I have spent this whole autumn being useful in ways I know how to be useful, and I have told myself that is enough. But sitting at your kitchen table on Tuesday mornings and listening to those poems, I have been learning something I should have learned a long time ago, which is that useful is not the same as present. I'm going to try to be both." She looked at me. "Margaret taught you that," she said. "Margaret tried to teach me that for 38 years, I said. "I'm a slow student." She smiled, the real smile, the one that reaches her eyes. "She knew that," she said. "She told me once, when you were not in the room, that you were the most reliable person she had ever known, and the most difficult to reach, and that those two things were somehow the same thing in you." I thought about that for a moment, standing at the harbor railing with the December lights on the water. She was not wrong, I said. Logan was quiet on my left. I glanced at him. He was looking at the water with the expression of a man who is absorbing something he will think about for a long time. "Your father was easier to reach," I said to him. "He got that from her side." "He got it from her," Logan said. "But he learned from you how to stay." We stood at the railing for a while longer. The cider was getting cold. The lights on Bow Street were doing the thing they do in December, the particular brightness that seems more than just electricity, and the harbor was moving quietly below us, dark and steady, the way it has been moving at the foot of this city for 400 years. What I want to tell you, before I take you into the last part of this story, is something about what I have learned about the difference between solving a problem and holding a space. I spent 42 years in an industry that rewarded problem solving. If there was a difficulty, you identified it, you assessed it, you constructed a response, and you resolved it, and then you moved on to the next difficulty. That was the work. And I am good at that work. I remain good at it. The plan that Logan and Caroline built, the care plan, the legal structures, the medical directives, those things are solid, because two people applied serious problem-solving intelligence to a serious problem. But Caroline's condition is not a problem that can be solved. It can be planned for and accommodated and managed and surrounded with care and structure, but it cannot be resolved and then moved past. It is a thing that is going to continue happening in ways that are not entirely predictable, and what it requires from the people who love her is not primarily problem-solving ability. It requires the willingness to stay in a situation that does not get neatly better, to show up on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, not because there is a specific task to accomplish, but because consistency is itself a form of love, to fix the hinge on the back door and replace the light bulb in the hallway, not because those things are part of a care plan, but because someone you love lives in a house where things need doing, and you have the ability to do them. I am telling you this because I think it is true, and because I did not understand it properly at 71 years old until an October evening when a young man handed me an envelope with unsteady hands. And I think some of you listening to this tonight might be in the position I was in, sitting in the car in the driveway, knowing there is a kitchen light on inside, and a conversation waiting that you do not quite know how to have. And I want to tell you from the other side of it, that the having of the conversation is not as hard as the dread of it, that the thing you are afraid of being is usually not who you turn out to be in the room, that the people who love you generally want exactly what you are capable of giving, not a more perfect version of it. Tell me if that lands. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Tell me what time it is. Leave a like if this has been worth your evening. Subscribe if you want to sit with me again tomorrow, because there is a new story here every single day, and I have a lot more of these in me. And share this one if you think somebody needs to hear it, because I know there are people out there tonight sitting in driveways, and maybe this reaches one of them. The spring came to Portsmouth the way spring always comes here, which is reluctantly, in fits and starts, a warm week in March followed by a nor'easter that reminds you this city reserves the right to be difficult. The winterberry I had put on Caroline's porch in October was long gone, replaced by something Logan had planted in February, a small evergreen that was doing better than any of us expected, given the winter we had. Caroline's chrysanthemum habit had apparently been interrupted long enough that someone else had taken over the planting, which was the kind of small domestic shift that nobody announces and everybody notices. The Tuesday and Thursday mornings had settled into something that I would not have predicted in October. They were, genuinely, one of the things I looked forward to most in my week, not because they were easy, because they were not always easy. There were mornings when Caroline's note system revealed gaps from the previous days that required a call to the care coordinator, and an adjustment to the plan, and a conversation with Logan that none of us had wanted to have. There were mornings when the ordinary work of maintaining the structures took everything we had and left no room for poetry. But there were also mornings when the practical things were done quickly, and what remained was simply the two of us at the kitchen table with coffee that had gone slightly cold, and she would say, "I read something this week I want to read to you," and I would put down whatever I was holding and listen. She had begun keeping a journal. This was the care coordinator's suggestion, a structured practice of writing down not just the practical notes, but the observations, the memories, the things that felt important to preserve. She showed me some of it one Thursday morning in April, not all of it. She was specific about which parts she was comfortable sharing, which was itself a form of the boundary she had asked us to respect on the harbor railing in December. What she showed me were pieces about Patrick, about the specific texture of the life they had built in the house on Juniper Lane, about Logan as a child, about herself, written with a candor that I found remarkable, the candor of a person who has made a decision to look clearly at her own experience while she still can. One entry, which she read to me with her coffee in one hand and the journal in the other, was about the morning she received her diagnosis. She wrote about sitting in the specialist's office after the assessment was complete and hearing the language the doctor used, the careful clinical language that contained within it an unmistakable trajectory. And she wrote about the drive home afterward, alone, through downtown Portsmouth in June. She wrote about stopping at the red light at the corner of State and Middle Streets, right near my house, without knowing that was where she was, and looking up and seeing the sunlight on the old brick of the buildings and thinking, I have been here my whole adult life and I have never really looked at this. And then the light changed, and she drove home. I sat with that for a long time after she read it. "You drove past my house," I said. "I did not know that at the time," she said. "You could have stopped," I said. She looked at me. "I know that now," she said. "I did not know it then." That is the thing about the conversation you are not yet ready to have. You drive past the house where it could happen, and the light changes and you go home. And the person in the house does not know you passed, and 6 months go by, and eventually your grandson hands an envelope to your father-in-law with unsteady hands, and something that should have been said in June finally gets said in October, and you lose those months, and you cannot get them back. But you also have not lost everything. The house is still there. The light is still there. The person is still there, with a screwdriver and a winterberry, and an old percolator, and the willingness to show up on Tuesday and Thursday mornings for as long as it matters. Logan came on Sunday evenings now, regularly, which had become the pattern over the winter. He would arrive at Caroline's house around 6, and they would have supper together. And sometimes I was there, and sometimes I was not. And the pattern of it had settled into something that felt, if not easy, then at least solid. He had told me in one of our kitchen conversations in February, quietly, that he had made a decision. He was going to stay in Portsmouth, not because he felt obligated. He had thought about this carefully, he said, the way Logan thinks about things, which is with a thoroughness that I recognize as his own, even while it resembles mine. He was going to stay because this was where his life was, Not because his mother's situation required his presence, though it did, but because he had been in Boston for 7 years, building a professional life that he was good at, and that left him, most evenings, sitting in an apartment in the South End, feeling like someone who had left the right place to prove he could succeed somewhere else. "I proved it," he said. "I'm ready to come back to where I actually want to be." I asked him if he had told his mother. "She told me," he said. "She said she knew I was going to figure it out eventually." That sounded like Caroline. The envelope was in my desk drawer now. I had put it there on the morning after Logan and I first talked, the evening I received the phone call, and it had stayed there through the autumn and the winter, and into the spring. It was not a secret. Caroline knew where it was. Logan knew where it was. It was simply in the drawer, which is where things go when they have been addressed, and no longer need to be kept on the mantel between the photograph and the compass. I took it out one evening in April, alone in the front room with the harbor lights doing their usual thing through the window. Not to read it again. I had read it enough to carry the words without needing the paper. I just held it for a moment, the thin envelope that had been too thin for any kind of good news, which had turned out to contain something more complicated and more necessary than good news. A plan. A trust. A decision made by a woman who knew she was losing something and chose to be deliberate about what she held on to. I thought about my father's compass on the mantel. Every man needs to know which direction is north. I thought about what north had come to mean this year. Not a cardinal direction, but a commitment to the people who needed me to be steady. Not fixing, not solving, staying. I put the envelope in the drawer and I locked it, not to keep it secret, but to put it somewhere that meant something, somewhere that said, "This was received, this was honored, this is being kept," the way you keep a promise, not by performing it once and moving on, by continuing to keep it. Day after day, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Sunday evenings at the table on Juniper Lane, the Winterberry replaced when it goes, the light bulb replaced when it burns out, the hinge tightened when it starts to make that sound again, which it will, because that is the nature of things that need maintaining. They need maintaining again. I went to the window and looked at the harbor. The lights were doing what they do. The water was doing what it has always done. The city was breathing its October into a different April, or the same April, the way it breathes through every season, old and continuous and salt and lit from within. I thought about Caroline reading me a poem on a Thursday morning when the snow came down. I thought about Logan with both hands around a coffee cup. I thought about Margaret standing at the window when the light changed, just being present for it. I thought about Patrick. I thought about the particular art of staying, which is not the same as the art of arriving, which is harder in some ways and quieter in all of them, which nobody teaches you and which some people never learn, which I was learning at 71 years old in the best school I had ever attended, which was the kitchen table on Juniper Lane on Tuesday and Thursday mornings in a year that had started with an envelope and a promise I did not yet understand. I understood it now. There is a particular morning quality in Portsmouth in late May that I have never found anywhere else, and I have been to enough ports in enough seasons to have some basis for comparison. It arrives around 6 in the morning, when the harbor fog is still sitting low on the Piscataqua, but the sun is already above the tree line to the east, and what you get is this specific combination of gray water and gold light that exists nowhere in nature except here, and for about 20 minutes before the fog burns off and the day becomes ordinary. I have been waking up early my entire life, the habit of a working man, and I have seen that light more mornings than I can count. I have never stopped being grateful for it. I was standing at my kitchen window watching it on a Thursday morning in late May when my phone showed a message from Caroline. It said, "Running 5 minutes late, put the second cup on," which meant she was coming here, not the other way around, which had become the new pattern since March when we had, without any formal agreement, begun alternating between her kitchen and mine. It was a small adjustment, But it mattered. The way small adjustments tend to matter more than the large ones, because they are the ones nobody planned, the ones that simply evolved because they were the right shape for the life they were fitting into. I put the second cup on. She arrived at 7:20 with her journal under one arm and a paper bag from the bakery on Congress Street that does the cardamom rolls she has liked since before I knew her. She put the bag on the table and sat down and pulled her coat off, and I poured the coffee and sat across from her. And for a moment we just sat there in the way that people sit when they have been meeting at the same table, long enough that the silence is comfortable, rather than empty. Outside the window, the harbor fog was finishing its retreat, the water going from gray to silver to something approaching blue. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," I said. "I had a conversation with Logan last Sunday evening," she said, "and he told me something that I think you already know, but that I wanted to hear from you directly." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "He told me that when he gave you the envelope in October, his hands were shaking, and that yours were not." "That is true," I said. "He said that was the moment he knew it was going to be all right," she said. "Not because of the envelope or the plan or any of the structures we had built, because your hands were steady." I looked at the coffee cup. "I have steady hands," I said. "I have always had steady hands. It is the one thing I can reliably count on." "It is not the one thing," she said. I looked up. She held my gaze with the particular directness that is one of the things I have always admired most about her. "I've been trying to write something in my journal for a couple of months," she said. "Something I wanted to say to you directly before I wrote it down, because I thought if I wrote it first, I might lose my nerve to say it aloud. So I'm going to say it now." "All right," I said. "You were not supposed to be the person I leaned on," she said. "That was not the design of the family. Patrick was my person. When Patrick died, I did not expect you to become something different to me. You were my father-in-law, and I loved you, and I was glad you were in Logan's life, and I would not have wished anything different. But what happened this year, the Tuesday mornings and the Thursday mornings, and the harbor walk in December, and the Winterberry, and the light bulb, and all of it, that was not something I planned. And I need you to know that it mattered to me in a way I do not have a word for. You became something I did not know I needed. Not a replacement for anything. Just its own thing. Just Edward. Just you." I sat with that for a long moment. I am not a man who is quick with the right words in the moments that most require them. I've acknowledged this about myself. But I had been sitting at tables with Caroline for 7 months by that May morning, and I had been learning, slowly, the thing Margaret tried to teach me for 38 years, which is that present is better than perfect, and honest is better than eloquent, and sometimes the right thing to say is simply the true thing. "You became something I did not know I needed either," I said. "I thought I knew what my life looked like at 71. I thought I had the shape of it figured out. The Tuesday mornings changed that, not because of the plan or the care coordination, because of the poems, because of what you told me about the drive home in June, because of who you are when you are not managing anything." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am going to write that down." "Write it down," I said. She opened her journal, and she wrote something, and then she closed it and picked up the cardamom roll, and we sat there in my kitchen with the harbor, having resolved itself from fog into a clear May morning. And for a while, we did not need to say anything else. Before I go further into what that spring became, I need to stop and ask you something directly. Because if you have been with me from the beginning of this story, from that October hallway and the thin envelope and the radiator knocking on Middle Street, you have been sitting with something that I think a lot of you recognize. Maybe not the specifics, maybe not the maritime city or the harbor lights or the cardamom rolls, but the shape of it, the thing that arrives in a thin envelope, or in a phone call on a Tuesday morning, or in the expression on someone's face when they open the door and you know immediately that something has changed. If you know that shape, I want you to tell me. Leave me a comment with where you are listening from tonight. What town? what state, what time it is there. Tell me if you are listening alone, or if somebody is in the next room. Leave a like if this story has been worth your time tonight, because every one of those tells me to keep going, and I have a great deal more to say, and I intend to say it. Subscribe if you are not already here, because there is a new one of these every single day, and tomorrow's might be the one that finds you at exactly the right moment. And if somebody in your life is carrying something alone right now, consider sending them this one. Because some stories are worth passing on. Okay, back to May. Back to Portsmouth. Back to what the spring became. Logan came to my house for the first time in a long while on a Saturday in late May. Not to Caroline's house, to mine. And he came alone, which was also something that had not happened in a while. He brought groceries. He stood in my kitchen and he made supper, which he knows how to do and which I, by contrast, have managed at the level of functional competence, rather than any genuine enthusiasm for the preceding 30 years. He made something with salmon that he had learned from a colleague in Boston who had grown up in coastal Maine, and we ate it at the kitchen table with the harbor showing between the houses in the long May evening light. We talked for a long time about work, which was going well. The risk assessment project had turned into something larger, and he had been asked to lead a new division, something he had not expected and was still absorbing. About Portsmouth, which he was settling back into with a comfort that he had not expected either. The way the city felt different when you came back to it as an adult than it had felt when you left it as a young man proving something. About Caroline, where things stood, which was stable, with the care plan holding and the Tuesday and Thursday mornings serving their purpose, and the journal filling slowly with the things she wanted to keep. And then, after supper, after the dishes were done, we sat in the front room with the harbor lights starting to appear in the May dusk, and Logan said, "I've been thinking about something you said in October, the night I came over after you read the envelope." "What did I say?" I said. "You said the right answer is what you figure out by staying at the table long enough," he said. "I've been thinking about that a lot, about what it means to stay." "And what have you decided?" I said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the harbor lights through the window. "I think staying is harder than leaving," he said. "Leaving feels like a decision. Staying feels like a choice you make every day without making it again, which is actually more difficult, because you have to keep choosing it without the momentum of the initial decision." I thought about that. "That is well put," I said. "I've been writing things down," he said. "Not a journal, just notes, things I want to remember about this year, about what you and my mother have been doing at those Tuesday and Thursday morning meetings, about what it looks like to show up for something that does not get fixed." "What does it look like?" I said. He looked at me. "Like you," he said. "It looks like you." I'm going to have to stop there for a moment, because that is the kind of thing a man does not receive gracefully when he is 71 years old and has spent his life being more comfortable with logistics than with being seen. I did what I usually do in those situations, which is I looked at the harbor lights for a few seconds and said something approximately practical, and then moved the conversation forward, which Logan accepted with the patience he has always had for my particular way of being. But I want you to know that I held what he said. I held it the way you hold the important things, not by displaying them, but by carrying them. There is something I want to tell you now, something I have been coming to slowly through this whole telling, and I want to say it carefully because it matters. This year taught me things that 42 years in maritime logistics, for all its complexity and its pressures and its genuine demands on a man's intelligence and endurance, did not teach me. It taught me about the difference between competence and presence. I was always competent. Competence is a kind of armor, a way of being useful that does not require you to be vulnerable, that keeps the transaction at the level of problem and solution, rather than person and person. Presence is different. Presence means showing up, not because you have a solution, but because you have decided that the other person's experience of not being alone matters more than your discomfort with not being able to fix anything. It means sitting at a kitchen table while the coffee goes cold and listening to a poem about water and not rushing toward the next practical item on the agenda. It means fixing the hinge on the back door, not because it is part of a care plan, but because it needs doing, and you are there. I want to stop here one more time, because what I am about to say is the part I most want you to carry with you when you leave this story. So before I say it, I want to make sure we are together. Tell me in the comments what time it is where you are right now. Tell me what town, what state. Tell me if you are listening to this while driving or at home or somewhere in between. Leave a like if this story has given you something tonight, because that is how I know it reached you, and reaching you is the whole point. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one, because there is a new story here every single day, and I keep them coming, because I believe there is somebody out there who needs each one. And please, if this is the kind of story that would help somebody you know, share it with them. You never know which story finds which person at exactly the right moment. All right. Here is what I want to say. I have been thinking, since that May morning in my kitchen with Caroline and the cardamom rolls and the harbor resolving from fog to blue, about what it means to be the person someone trusts with their most careful planning. Caroline did not put that envelope together and entrust it to me because she thought I could save her from what is coming. She put it together because she needed someone to help her face what is coming, with as much dignity and structure and love as possible. She did not need a problem solver. She needed a keeper. Someone to hold the important things carefully while they waited to be needed. Someone steady enough to receive hard news without falling, and present enough to show up on Tuesday and Thursday mornings with the second cup already poured. I think about the word keeper a great deal now. I have come to believe it is one of the most important things a person can be for another person. Not a fixer, not a rescuer, not a manager of situations, a keeper. Someone who holds the things that matter, who keeps the promises made in careful handwriting across 8 pages, who keeps the hinge tightened and the hallway lit, who keeps showing up, not dramatically, not with the noise of a grand gesture, but quietly and consistently, in the way that matters most to the person being kept. I think some of you listening tonight are keepers and do not know it yet. You are the person your family comes to. You are the one who gets the call when something goes wrong. You are the one sitting in the car in the driveway, trying to find the right words before you walk in. Let me tell you what I have learned about that. You do not need the right words. You need the willingness to walk in. The words will find themselves if you give them time, and if you are honest, and if you stop trying to solve what cannot be solved, and simply agree to stay. That is the whole of it. That is what I know at 71 that I did not know at 45. The summer came to Portsmouth with its particular noise, and its particular light, and its tourist traffic on the waterfront, and the lobster boats going out before 6 in the morning and coming in around noon, and the restaurants on Ceres Street filling up in the evenings, and the particular beauty of the harbor on a clear July night, when the water holds the last of the daylight long after the sun has gone. I have always loved this city in summer, even as I have always been slightly relieved when September comes and the quiet returns. Caroline went to Portland, Maine, to visit her sister for a long weekend in July. She had planned this trip in the spring, had told both Logan and me about it well in advance, had coordinated with the care coordinator about the logistics of being away from her established routine for several days, had prepared notes for her sister about what to watch for and what to do if certain situations arose. She handled all of this with the same thorough competence that she brings to everything, and she went, and she had a good time, and she came back on a Sunday evening and called me from the car to tell me she was home. "How was Portland?" I said. "Smaller than I remembered," she said. "Beautiful. My sister made a meal that took her all day and tasted exactly like something our mother used to make, which I did not expect, and which made me cry in the kitchen, which embarrassed both of us." "That sounds about right," I said. "I kept good notes," she said. "The whole time. I wrote things down immediately and I did not lose anything I did not want to lose. A pause. I wanted you to know that. I'm glad you know it, I said. I am too, she said, and then, Edward. Yes. Thank you for making this possible. Not just the practical things. I mean, you made it possible for me to go, to trust that the structure would hold while I was away, to not be afraid that I would go somewhere and come back and find things fallen apart. You made it feel held. I looked at the harbor through the front room window. The July evening light was doing the thing it does in summer, lasting long past when you expect it to, golden and then pink, and then a particular deep blue that is not quite night. You made it possible, too, I said. You built the plan. You wrote the letter. You sat across from me at that kitchen table and you told me what you needed, and you trusted me to hear it. That takes courage. That takes more courage than most people understand. She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. I'm going to go put my things away, she said finally. And then I'm going to sit in the kitchen and write down the thing my sister's meal tasted like before I lose it. Good, I said. Write it down. Good night, Edward. Good night, Caroline. I put the phone down and I sat in the front room with the July evening going dark around me, and Margaret's photograph on the mantel, and the brass compass beside it, and the drawer with the envelope in it that no one needed to open anymore, because what was inside it had been received and honored and was being kept, day by day, Tuesday and Thursday mornings and Sunday evenings, and a phone call from the car on the way home from Portland, Maine, in July. I thought about what she said, that I made it feel held. I've been trying to understand what that means, what the actual mechanism of it is, because I am a man who likes to understand mechanisms. And what I have come to believe is this: holding something steady for someone is not a passive act. It looks passive from the outside because it does not make noise. It does not announce itself. It does not produce documents, though it may organize them. It does not solve problems, though it may sit beside them without flinching. What it actually requires is a continuous, active choice to remain present for something that is ongoing and uncertain, and that does not resolve into a clear conclusion. It requires showing up when showing up is ordinary, not just when it is dramatic. It requires caring about the hinge on the back door, and the light bulb in the hallway, and whether the chrysanthemum has been replaced before it goes all the way brown. It requires sitting with someone in a kitchen while the coffee goes cold, and letting that be enough. Most of us are better at the dramatic version. We rise to the occasion when the occasion announces itself. We show up for the crisis. What is harder is the sustained, ordinary, patient kind of presence that does not get a moment of climax, that does not build to a scene where everything is resolved, that simply continues, day after day, without the validation of a clear ending. That is the kind of love that built this city. The fishermen who went out every morning, not because it was dramatic, but because it was what needed doing. The families who maintained their houses through 3 centuries of hard winters, not because anyone was watching, but because the house needed maintaining. The harbor that has been here since before anyone now living was born, and will be here after all of us are gone, steady and salt and continuous, keeping what it keeps. I'm going to ask you one more time, before I get to the end of this, to stay with me for just a moment, because I have been talking for a while now and I want to make sure that what I have been saying has actually arrived. Tell me in the comments what you are taking away from this tonight. Tell me the word that is sitting with you right now, right this second, after everything we have been through together from October to July. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is. Leave a like if this has been something real for you, because real is what I am always trying to give you, and the like is how I know I got there. Subscribe if you want to be here tomorrow, because I am going to be here tomorrow with another one of these, and the day after that, and the day after that, without fail, because there are people out there who need these conversations, and I am going to keep having them. And share this one with whoever needs it most tonight. You know who that person is. Send it to them. A story like this one can find somebody at exactly the right moment and change something for them. I believe that. Okay? Here is the end. August came. The fog came back in August, the way it always does. Not the thin morning fog of May, but the heavy, serious fog of August that sits on the harbor for days at a time and muffles the sound of the boats and turns the city into something softer and more private than its usual self. I have always liked the August fog. Margaret used to say it was the city taking a breath. On a Thursday morning in the second week of August, I arrived at my own kitchen at 7:30 to find that Caroline had arrived before me, which had never happened before. She was at the stove and there was coffee made, not in my percolator but in a French press she had apparently brought with her, which produced a different coffee, something lighter and more complex than what I usually make, and she had 2 cups on the table and a small paper bag from the Congress Street Bakery, and she turned when I came in and said, "I wanted to be the one to have it ready for once." I sat down. She sat across from me. "Logan told me something last night," she said. "He told me he is thinking of asking someone to dinner, a woman he knows from work. He wanted to tell me before he did it, which I thought was sweet, and then I realized he probably told you first." "He told me in June," I said. She looked at me. "Of course he did," she said. "He was not certain he was ready," I said. "I told him readiness is overrated and what matters is whether you want to try." She wrapped her hands around the French press coffee. "That sounds like something Margaret would have said." "It was," I said. "She said it to me in the spring of 1972. We had been seeing each other for 3 months, and I told her I was not certain I was ready to be serious, and she said exactly that, and then she went home and I sat in my car for 20 minutes, and then I drove to her parents' house and knocked on the door." Caroline looked at me with something in her expression that I recognized after a moment as happiness, not the uncomplicated kind, the kind that has been through something and is more valuable for it. "I did not know that story," she said. "There are a few of them you have not heard yet," I said. "I want to hear them," she said. "I want to write them down." "Then we have more Thursday mornings ahead of us," I said. She looked at her coffee cup. "Yes," she said, "we do." Outside the kitchen window, the August fog was sitting on the harbor the way it does, heavy and muffling and patient, turning the water invisible, turning the city into its softer version. The harbor lights were not visible this morning. The water was not visible this morning. But I knew they were there, the way you know the things that have always been there, even when you cannot see them, the way you know the compass still points north, even when it is in the drawer. I want to tell you what I have learned. Not what I have been through, though I have been through things this year that I did not expect at 71. What I have actually learned, the things that changed in me, the things that are different now from what they were on that October evening, when a young man handed me an envelope with unsteady hands. I have learned that the most important things do not arrive loudly. They arrive in thin envelopes. They arrive in phone calls that end after one sentence. They arrive in the expression on a face when a door opens, and someone who loves you looks at you, and you know immediately that something is different. The loudness is a distraction. The important things are quiet. I have learned that age is not the same as wisdom, but it is not unrelated to it either. I am 71 years old, and I spent 42 years developing a professional competence that I am genuinely proud of, and none of that competence prepared me for what this year required. What prepared me was the accumulation of ordinary days, the 38 years of marriage, the losses I have survived, the slow, unmarked process of becoming a person who has been places and seen things and loved people and lost them and is still here, still getting up in the morning, still making the coffee the same way, still looking at the harbor because the harbor is still there and still worth looking at. I have learned that the people who hold things together quietly, the ones who build the plans and keep the calendars and manage the structures and make sure the important things are handled, those people need to be held too. They need someone to show up on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. They need someone to replace the Winterberry when it goes. They need someone to whom they can say, "I lost 40 minutes this morning," and hear in response, "All right, we are going to call the care coordinator, and then I am going to fix the hinge on the back door." They need someone who does not require them to manage the situation of their own difficulty, someone who will just sit at the table and let the coffee go cold. I have learned that the word family is not primarily a description of blood relation. It is a description of the choice to keep showing up. Logan is my grandson and Caroline is my daughter-in-law, and those relationships were made by love, and by law and by time. But what made them family, what makes them the people I would drive across any weather to sit at a table with, is the accumulated choice to remain, the staying, the daily, undramatic, ordinary choice to still be here. And I have learned, perhaps most importantly, perhaps the thing that will stay with me longer than anything else, that it is not too late. I am 71 years old, and I learned how to sit still. I learned how to listen to a poem on a Thursday morning without looking at what needed to be done next. I learned how to say, "I did not know I needed this either," and mean it in a way that was not performance, but truth. It is not too late to learn the things you missed. It is not too late to become the person you needed to be 30 years ago. The table is still there. The coffee is still possible. The harbor is still doing what it has always done. If you are sitting somewhere tonight with something in your hands that feels too heavy, something you have been carrying alone because you did not know how to put it down or who to put it down with, I want you to hear this. There is a person in your life who will hold it with you if you let them. Maybe you know who it is. Maybe it is the person you keep almost calling. Maybe it is the person you drove past in June when you were not ready, and who is still there now that you might be. The envelope can be opened. The table is available. The right direction is toward the people who will still be there after the conversation you are afraid to have. Tell me in the comments what this meant to you tonight. One word, whatever word is sitting in your chest right now after all of it. Leave it there for me. I read everyone. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is. Subscribe if you have not, because there is a new story here every single day, and I will be here for every one of them, and some of them start in hallways just like mine, and end at kitchen tables with the harbor showing between the houses, and the coffee that went cold, and the particular, irreplaceable company of the people we chose to keep. If you stayed with me all the way through this one, from October to August, from the hallway on Middle Street to the August fog on the Piscataqua, then you gave me something I do not have an easy name for. You let me tell you the hardest and the most important story I know how to tell, and you listened all the way to the end. So I am going to ask you one last thing. Leave me a comment with one word. The word is keeper. Not because it is a code and not because I am asking for a trick, because if you listened all the way to the end, you know what that word means now, and what it means is what I most want you to carry out of this and into your own life and the lives of the people you love. Subscribe. There is a new story here every single day, and every one of them carries something true, like this one. Share it with whoever needs it most tonight, and take care of the people who are carrying something alone. Show up on the Tuesday mornings. Fix the hinge on the back door. Let the coffee go cold. From me to you, from an old man in a house on Middle Street, with the harbor showing between the houses, and a compass on the mantel pointing north, thank you. Thank you for being out here in the dark with me. I will see you tomorrow.